to my family, and in particular, my parents, who brought us here to Canada. To my wife, Sophie, and my kids, I love you. I thank you for all the support and love you give me. The truth will protect us. Our honor and our family will get through this together. Sorry about that. Thank you, Speaker.
That is Liberal MP Han Dong yesterday announcing that he will be sitting as an independent. This after a story from Global News suggested he had discussions with a Chinese diplomat, and it's actually beyond it being a story that everyone's kind of looking at and going, where did this come from? Tom Mulcair, I want to ask you if the offshoot of the story is that he had these discussions with a Chinese diplomat and apparently tried to tell this Chinese diplomat that they should not release the two Michaels, right, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, from detention, from prison there, because it would help the Conservatives. That's the part I don't get. How would that have possibly helped the Conservatives? It would have helped the Liberals. They're the ones who are trying to get him to come home.
Well, that's the part that is very hard to follow in the whole story. What we do have to hang on is the fact that as these bits and pieces of information from the security services have been leaked, none of them have been contradicted. Is this a question of translation? Is it a question of misunderstanding? Here's one concrete thing that has come out. That type of contact between what we call a backbench MP, somebody who has no official role around the cabinet table, is not a member of the government per se. They're a member of the legislature, the House of Commons, but not of the government. They would normally let people around the PM know, let the people higher up in the authority of the party know about it, and he did not do that. So that's an objective element in there. I found that very sad, what we just heard and saw, and I found it heartfelt. So, we're talking about defending our democratic institutions. One part of our ethic in our democratic institutions is the presumption of innocence, and Mr. Dong's not even charged with anything. But you do sense that now there's been so much that's been released that he's almost in a position where that burden has been reversed, and it's up to him to try to prove the negative, to prove that he hasn't done anything wrong. With regard to Mr. Trudeau, I think that this actually puts a lot more pressure on him. This is one of those cases where the very human nature of what we just saw from MP Dong was something that Trudeau can't ignore. Now, he has, at the beginning of all this, Trudeau tried to paint anybody who even talked about it right at the beginning, oh, you're racist. Well, that didn't last for very long, because it turned out that there was a whole bunch of information and he couldn't deny it anymore. But here, we have to remind ourselves that this is about the Chinese Communist Party's interventions. This is about the Chinese regime. Call it the Beijing government. Call it what you will. But it's not about your neighbor whose family came over here from Hong Kong or from somewhere else with Chinese origins and has just lived here and worked here and contributed to society, because that's the big danger here. It's a slippery slope, and it does become something where the average Canadian might be having thoughts about generalizing. Mm-hmm. And this is not what we should be doing. We should be looking specifically about what this government has been doing. So what have we seen? Well, this case alleges that this interference came through the Toronto Consul General of the Chinese government. That's interesting because it was also alleged with regard to the interference in the election, or the defeat in the election, of the Vancouver mayor, Kennedy Stewart, that it was the Consul General of Vancouver, of the Chinese government as well. So there is a bit of a pattern here. And I think that the only way to clear the air is for Justin Trudeau, believe it or not, to call an inquiry, to have a full commission of inquiry. And I think that rather than continuing to play the game of, and by the way, I'm not taking anything away from David Johnston. He's an old friend and somebody I quite admire. But he shouldn't be part of this at this stage. Okay. This is something that Trudeau should actually get done. Send this thing to a full inquiry. Stop fooling around, because it is having effects like the one we just listened to today.
It's a question, obviously, that a lot of people now who perhaps, and it's funny, when we talked to Jim Menney, for example, yesterday, and I talk about this alleged Chinese involvement in elections, the answer seems to be for most people, for most Canadians, not if you're involved, obviously, in politics or involved, Tom, as we are, about talking about the news. Most Canadians don't really seem to care about this. It's not top of mind for them right now. But every time there's another new nail in the coffin here, as you will, I think more and more Canadians look at this and go, why is this still going on? And we'll start talking about it.
Yeah, I've heard that before from one other pundit who just tried to dismiss the whole thing, saying, I was in another province and I was talking to ordinary folks and this subject didn't come up. I don't think I live in a fishbowl. I don't think I'm disconnected from what the average person is saying. This doesn't just come up with people that I do commentary with on the French side or on the English side. This comes up immediately in conversations with other people who follow the news. And, that's most people. And they're just saying, what is going on here? And what has Trudeau got to hide? That's the question I get the most often, because people wind up talking to me because they know that I get a chance to comment and analyze. And that's the question I get. That's the number one question. What's Trudeau got to hide? And I always go back, and I've quoted this in articles. I've actually quoted a certain Aaron Rand speaking with Bob Fife. And Bob Fife gave you an answer a couple of weeks ago. He says, well, the reason Trudeau won't have an inquiry is because there's something in there that's going to hurt him and hurt the Liberal Party. And I've not heard a better explanation since.
I'm troubled by the way the headlines have been released. I find, the fact that they're just putting it out there, because I think the average person, we're talking about how the average person sort of grasps this information.
Right.
When you see a headline that says that Liberal MP Han Dong secretly advised Chinese diplomat, that's where it stops, right? You don't necessarily take in the rest of the information. And this poor man's life, as we see, has become unraveled. And I'm saying poor man, I don't know. He may be involved in this. He may have culpability. He may not. But I just feel like the only, honestly, let's just jump to the bottom line here, which is that the inquiry has to happen now. Is it as simple as just saying, thank you, Mr. Johnson, your services are no longer needed?
It is exactly that simple. Great question, by the way, Natasha, because Trudeau has been playing this really sketchy game. So he says, well, the person who's going to decide this is David Johnston. That is a bowl of malarkey. That is pure malarkey. Because the only person in Canada who decides this ain't David Johnston, who's a former Governor General, but who right now is a retired Governor General. It's Justin Trudeau. He's the only person who gets to decide this. Does he want to consult somebody else? That's his business. But starting to look at what's being wrought by that weight is the type of thing that we just saw with Han Dong. It does seem immensely unfair if all of this is about defending principles of democracy, which include the presumption of innocence. So Trudeau's got no more place to hide on this. It's complete baloney. This is just a mandate that he gave to Johnson. He can withdraw it tomorrow morning, and he should, because, again, the irony of this situation is instead of Trudeau being able to just stand up and say, well, that's why I asked Johnston to look at it, nobody's buying that anymore. Nobody is buying that anymore.
I was reading some of the comments from some of the people who will be accompanying Joe Biden in this meeting that he has with Justin Trudeau tonight, tomorrow, et cetera. And on the issue of this Chinese spying, they almost kind of laughed it off in a sense, Tom, saying, hey, we know, the Chinese have been trying to influence elections forever. It's kind of like Canada, welcome to the club, treating it as something not very serious.
Yeah, but then again, last weekend a book was published talking about the fact that the American security community was very worried about the fact that Canada appears to do nothing when it has this information. And you might have noticed this important blip on the screen a couple of weeks ago. Something that's calling itself AUKUS, so that's Australia, United Kingdom, and U.S., has created their own force, their own alliance around the Pacific. You might notice that a very major Pacific country called Canada, and an ally of those countries, ain't in there. And what I'm being told on background is it's because they just don't trust us on some of these security issues anymore after Trudeau failed to follow along with the Five Eyes group and keep Huawei out of the 5G networks, because that was considered, after analysis, to be immensely dangerous for our security. And guess what? Trudeau finally went along, but much too late. So again, Trudeau's past behavior on these issues has been lamentable. And Canadians have every right to have their government defend the basic institutions of a democracy, the most important of which is the right to vote in a clean election that hasn't been illegally influenced, especially by an outside power.
Does this come up in conversation with Joe Biden?
I doubt it, although Biden will have been briefed about this, because if there is discussion with the press, there'll be sort of an oblique question along the lines of what you just said, Aaron. So we say, well, this is a grave concern. Somebody will find a way to put it into the mix, which is, for Trudeau, again, it's nightmarish. This was supposed to be 2 days of nothing but good news, like the Irish summit between Reagan and Mulroney. This is supposed to be the thing. Wow, this is great. These guys are singing, Irish eyes are smiling together, and we're all getting along. That's the type of trip that Trudeau was hoping for, to get the pressure off him, to get all eyes off this one issue that has been, you've been around this game for a long time. Usually it takes like 48 hours for something to disappear. This thing ain't disappearing.
That's
because
just
it's been coming out drip, 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 and just hasn't stopped, and maybe there's another shoe to drop as well. I'm told that the most clear case proven with the hardest evidence is the Vancouver election interference. That's the one that's got the best evidence.
We have to wrap up. If
interesting.
you had to pick a day, when's he going to call a public inquiry? This week, next week? He's going to wait, obviously, for Joe Biden to leave. How soon is that going to happen?
I think he's going to have to do it before Easter. I can't see this thing dragging on anymore. And if there's one scintilla of further evidence that comes out, then it's going to be unbearable. But it is unbearable to watch Han Dong standing there in tears saying this is totally unfair.
Yeah.
Because you don't want that to happen. And it wouldn't have happened if Trudeau had actually called the inquiry.
Tom Mulcair, back tomorrow morning with Andrew Carter at 7:40. Thank you, Tom.
Talk to you tomorrow, guys.